Hi everyone, this is Zoe. I'm back with this week's edition of the American Chess Magazine Puzzle Calendar. Let's get into the puzzle for Monday, March 13th. It was composed by Jorve Bartolovic in 1961. Again, all the puzzles in this series are white to move, mate in 2. If you want to solve this puzzle for yourself, then go ahead and pause the video here. So for me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 9 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 4 out of 5. So here in this position, white looks like they're really close to mating black's king. I mean, bishop f4 is an idea. You might be able to take on e4 at some point. Knight c4 and knight c6 are both really close, and there's this discovery on the 5th rank. But here the problem with all these moves, most of these moves, is that black can always run the king to f5. So from the start, I feel like king takes f5 was always the trying to make a discovery along the 5th rank, so like stopping king takes f5 was always the way to go for me, because all the other checks, I mean, there's quite a few problems with them. For example, queen takes e4, the queen or the rook can both take, so it's very difficult to make this work. Also, bishop f4, not only can the king take on f5 and run away, black can also play rook takes f4. So the move with the check with the most possibility of working was this discovered check along the 5th rank. And with that said, I consider many moves, so like moving the knight away first or moving the king away first. If you move the king away to the 6th rank first, then the problem is e takes f5 does come with check, and white cannot block with check. Oh, actually, white cannot block with checkmate because against knight f6, black has bishop d5. So after e takes f5 check, then white does not have mate in 2. King to the 6th rank doesn't work, but then one move that I considered for a long time was king to b4. I saw like, oh, if king takes f5, then knight takes e7 is checkmate, and like if, for example, black plays something else, then something random, then white has knight e3. Sorry, white had after queen f3, white has the option of knight. Oh, actually, here white doesn't even have checkmate because the king can run to the d6 square. So king b4 doesn't work, but also black would have e3 check, so there's actually a lot of problems with this. Discover check, and white again does not have mate in 2. So moving the king away first didn't really work out, and then I consider moving the knight away. So again, there's a lot of knight moves here that you have to consider. I started with knight takes e7, just not for any particular reason, but just because like, oh, it's guarding f5, and I'm threatening knight c6 and knight g6. But the problem with this one is that black can play e takes f5, and after the king moves check, black can block with bishop d5. However here, and if knight takes knight c6 check, then black has rook takes c6. White has no other checks. Knight c4 check fails to bishop takes c4. So this does not lead to mate in 2. Also, similarly, I mean, knight e3 would not work because again, I think e takes f5, and knight g4 check doesn't work. Knight c4 check can get taken. Any king move can get blocked with bishop to d5. Knight c6 check, again, the rook can take. So black's barely holding on, but they can unfortunately defend against everything. And the other knight moves are less hopeful because like they don't really threaten any other checkmates. Knight b4 is an interesting try because you're threatening knight to d3. Here, though, black can play, I think it's e3? No, e3 doesn't, yeah, e3 is the defense here, because if knight d3 check, black has king e4, and knight c6 check fails to queen takes c6, and rook takes e3, black can just block on e4. So basically, the next knight moves that makes sense. I didn't go in order because like these are the moves that would be the most logical because you're kind of seeing where the knight can jump to threaten more checks. The next logical move is knight to f4, and this does end up being the correct answer. So here the idea is that if e3, white has knight to c4 checkmate. Whereas if you started with, for example, knight b4 e3, then after knight c4, this is not checkmate because black can play rook takes c4. Knight f4 is blocking the 4th rank. Also, white's threatening potentially knight d3, so like if we play e takes d5, then knight d3 is checkmate. King takes f5, white has king to b4 checkmate because the bishop is pinning this pawn, so e5 blocking is not possible. And any other black move would just lead to king b4. Sorry, not king b4 because here black can play king d6, but king c6 checkmate. And basically this puzzle, I thought it was very difficult because you have so many moves to consider, and black's defenses are not easy as well. That's why I gave this a difficulty of 9 out of 10. And just because the puzzle was so long, satisfaction is only 4 out of 5. This was the puzzle for Tuesday, March 14th. It was composed by Les Gallagher in 1941. Again, if you want to solve this puzzle for yourself, then go ahead and pause the video here. So for me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 7 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 4.5 out of 5. So here it was a bit obvious from the start that it's probably going to be about zugzwang, just because if you look closely, then all of black's pieces are restricted in some way. For example, these pawns can't move, they're being blockaded. This rook can't move because it's being pinned. Any knight move would allow queen to e6 checkmate. Queen moves off this diagonal would allow rook to e4 checkmate. And queen moves on this diagonal all lose in some form. Queen d3, knight takes d3, queen e4, rook takes e4, queen f5, knight f3, knight f3, and queen g6, white has knight takes g6. So the queen can't move at all. So then black doesn't have many other pieces to move. The king literally has no legal squares to move to. And that only leaves this knight. If the knight moves anywhere, then queen takes c7 is checkmate. And if the knight moves to d6, then white has queen c3 checkmate. That was definitely, for me, the hardest mate to see out of all of these. So once you see that black literally has no possible moves, then you see, oh, just rook b4. I'm keeping all my previous threats, and I am also just passing the turn to black. No matter what they play, white will have checkmate, like I detailed before. The reason that rook c4 with the same idea doesn't work is because black has knight d6 and queen c3 is no longer possible. So here, it's kind of hard to see every one of black's defenses and the mate that counters it, and there's so many different types. That's why I thought this puzzle was very difficult. The puzzle for Wednesday, March 15th, it was composed by Charles Shepard in 1920. Again, if you want to solve the puzzle for yourself, then go ahead and pause the video here. So for me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 5 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 5 out of 5. So here in this position, black's king is very trapped. It feels like any one check will be able to get mated. And queen e6 as an option just jumped out immediately to me. So the first one I've considered was definitely d6. Also, one note about this position is that black's pieces are very pinned, I guess. If the knight moves anywhere, then knight c4 is checkmate. And if the queen moves somewhere, white doesn't actually have... Well, if the queen moves somewhere, then white possibly has f6 check because there's no longer any pin. So the pieces on the e-file stacked there look pretty, but they're actually kind of very stuck. So d6 was definitely the first move that I considered. It looks like it might have a lot of... It looks like it has a lot of potential because if queen takes f5, rook takes f5 is checkmate. If knight takes f5, rook takes f5 is checkmate. Or like if knight moves somewhere else, then knight c4. Unfortunately, this is not checkmate because the king can run to d5. Here, white has to play queen e6 checkmate. But along that line of reasoning, black's best defense here is knight takes f5 because... Hang on, not knight takes f5. Here, black's defense is actually to play knight to c4 because the idea is if knight takes c4, the king can run to d5, and now the queen is being blocked. If bishop takes e4, well, that's not even checked. If rook takes e4, then knight takes e4, and here white does not have mate in 1, so overall you cannot find mate in 2. The other move to consider is d takes c6. I considered this really fast, but then I'm like, oh yeah, queen takes c6 check. It's a check. If you take, it's not even check. So there's no way white can give checkmate, so I just rejected it. And I also saw that queen e6 check, black can just take, so again, white doesn't have mate in 2. But white can play f6 checkmate, which is really, really cool. You're blocking the check, and also you are opening up the rook. What I mentioned in the beginning, if the queen moves, white might have f6 checkmate. So this was definitely a very cool puzzle. The reason d takes c6 works and not d6 is because here, if knight c4, white has the option of queen b5. So this queen is opened up, and the pawn, which was originally guarding the b5 square, has been taken. This puzzle was quite difficult, but once you got over the initial stigma of, oh, look, it's check, then it becomes easier to solve. This was the puzzle for Thursday, March 16th. It was composed by Maximilian Fagi in the year 1900. Again, if you want to solve this puzzle for yourself, then go ahead and pause the video here. White to move, mate in 2. So for me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 6 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 5 out of 5. So here in this position, c6 check for white almost works, but the problem is black has king to c3. And basically, if white manages to guard this c3 square again, then white will be able to give checkmate. King c2 was the first one I considered, but the problem is b1 queen check. White has to respond, and then there's no time to insert c6. Then I considered, well, what if I move my bishop away and then guarding the c3 square? But the problem with this one is that black can play king takes e3, and after c6 check, black can just take the pawn. So the bishop has to stay on this diagonal, so logically my next move was bishop to c2. But the problem here is that, well, the thing is, if king takes e3, c6 is checkmate, and same with queen takes e3, c6 is still checkmate. It's really hard for black to guard against this threat because this place is so secluded. Like, there's no way for black to interpose anything on this diagonal. So it looks like white got the mate, but the problem is b1 queen, and if c6 and queen b6, this spite block just it makes white so that they can't have mate in 2 exactly, so that ruins the puzzle. Therefore, the correct answer is bishop to b1. Now if takes, the pawn is in the way, so c6 is checkmate, and black has no way to defend. So this is definitely a very cool puzzle, also slightly more difficult than we're normally seeing. Puzzle for Friday, March 17th. It was composed by Stanislav Juracek in the year 2021. Again, if you want to solve this puzzle for yourself, then go ahead and pause the video here. So for me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 5 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 5 out of 5. Here in this position, the key thing to notice is that black's king is of course very weak, but trying to go for a discover attack on this diagonal doesn't really work because the knight can't move anywhere with check, so there's no double check possibilities, and black can block in too many different ways. So this diagonal is not really the best place to focus any mating efforts. But on the other hand, this diagonal is very hopeful. For example, queen g8 was the first one I've considered. It almost looks like the right answer, because if bishop takes, then queen takes e6 is checkmate, and white is threatening rook e5 and rook d6 double checkmate. Sorry, rook d6 is not double checkmate because the king can run here. So, but white is threatening rook e5, and because it's double checkmate, it's really, really hard to stop. But unfortunately, here black has c5, and after rook e5, the king can run to c6. After rook d6, the king can run to e4, and if bishop b7 check, then black can play king to c4. So after seeing that the problem was this c5 move, then I tried to stop it by bishop b7 because that seemed like the best way. So in order to make bishop b7 checkmate possible, then the c4 square has to be guarded somehow. Knight b2 doesn't really work because this knight was covering the c5 square before. So the right move is rook to e4, guarding this c4 square. Now if c5, bishop b7 is checkmate. And no matter how black takes, white has checkmate. For example, if king takes e4, then white can play knight to c3 checkmate. If bishop takes e4, then white has queen g8. If knight takes e4, then here it's not queen g8 because black can play bishop e6, but white has queen a2 checkmate. It's definitely very nice geometry, all revolving around the idea that after white wants to stop this c5 move, which would have created an escape square for black. Final puzzle of the video. This is the puzzle for this weekend, March 18th through 19th. It was composed by Nikolai Akimov in the year 2020. Again, pause the video here if you want to solve the position for yourself. So for me, this puzzle had a difficulty rating of 8 out of 10 and a satisfaction rating of 5 out of 5. So here in this position, black's king is very trapped, and one check would be able to give checkmate. And this diagonal looks like a great place to start targeting. I mean, queen a8 check. But the problem here is that after the knight blocks and then the bishop can block, black delays the checkmate twice, so then it does become a mate in 3, not a mate in 2. Similarly, if bishop c6, then take, and then block, white again does not have mate in 2 moves. Therefore, checking along this diagonal is kind of really hard to make possible. Again, if queen takes e7 or something, queen e4, the bishop can still block. So instead of checking along this diagonal, I started looking for other pieces to give checks with. Rook h2 was definitely a possibility that I tried to consider for a while. For example, knight e2, so opening up the h2 square. But here the problem is that black can simply play something like bishop takes e2, and if rook h2, now the knight is hanging. I also tried knight 1 to g2 with the idea of rook g1, but this isn't even checkmate because the king can just run to h3 or f3. Then I finally came up with the idea of using the knight to give checkmate, so a knight on h4. Knight f5 doesn't work just because black can take, but knight f3, this is the right answer. The idea is to give checkmate on h4. Now if the knight moves to try guard it, then queen e2 is checkmate. If bishop takes f3, then here white has bishop h3 checkmate. And if king takes f3, I think this is the hard part of the puzzle. Rook f1 is not checkmate because king g2, but white has castles checkmate. I think in a previous puzzle a while back, also in this calendar, there was a position where there were actually two answers. I think one of them was rook d1 and another was castle queenside. Back then I assumed that, oh, maybe artistic puzzles just don't allow castling. But here, this one, castles is the only way to give checkmate. So this puzzle was quite difficult. Also, there were a lot of patterns to consider. It was a quite cool puzzle. Sorry for the extra long video. I kind of ran out of time, so I smushed all these 6 puzzles into 1 week's video. So, and also these puzzles this week were, I feel like, harder than usual. So that was not great for me. 6 really hard puzzles, and you have to fit it all into one video. So yeah, but I hope you guys enjoyed the puzzles. As always, if you enjoyed my content, please like and subscribe. And that's all for today. Bye.